the Awaken Your Ego podcast with Joanne and Ariana. We are a health podcast that explores topics to do with biohacking and self-discovery.
We are also on the self-discovery journey, and we want to attract listeners that are doing the same in order to help them realize they're not alone.
Ego differs from conventional medical spas and wellness centers. We believe that the secret to maximizing one's sense of self is in addressing the entire person, inside and out. We provide state-of-the-art aesthetic treatments as well as lifestyle management and holistic health solutions. We aim to please with our efficient and friendly customer service and guarantee with our scientifically proven alternative therapies and lifestyle optimizations that every patient will leave our care with a boosted ego. Our goal is to help our patients realize the necessity of self-care and to encourage them to prioritize their health and wellness goals. When we make self-care and confidence a priority, then we're able to bring to light our potential for happiness and growth. This podcast is a way to expand our reach so that we are able to spread the word on the importance of self, the whole self, inside and out.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. Please reach out to your medical provider if you have questions about any of the treatments we discuss to see if it's a right fit for you. Now on to our show.
Welcome to the Awaken Your Ego podcast. We're super excited to have Dr. John Schinnerer. Am I saying that wrong?
No, that's pretty good. Actually, it's Schinnerer, but yeah, it's a very tough name. That's why I go by John.
Yeah, there you go, Dr. John. All right. Dr. John Schinnerer graduated from UC Berkeley with a Ph.D. in educational psychology. Dr. John was one of 3 experts to consult with Pixar on the Academy Award-winning movie Inside Out. He has spoken at organizations such as Stanford Medical School, UC Berkeley, Kaiser Permanente, Sutter Health, Yahoo, AT&T, and The Gap. He has been featured in national media such as U.S. News and World Report, Reader's Digest, and Self Magazine. He's a nationally recognized speaker and an award-winning author. He was featured in a documentary entitled Skewed by Paola Bossola on the effects of violence in the media. He wrote the award-winning book, How Can I Be Happy? His areas of expertise range from high performance to stress management, to positive psychology, anger management, to creating happy, thriving relationships. Over 10,000 people have taken his online anger management course. He recently recorded micro courses on anger management and forgiveness for Simple Habit. They have been listened to over 60,000 times in the first 4 months. Dr. John also hosts a podcast to help men evolve towards greater success, happiness, and connection called the Evolved Caveman. Quite the bio there.
Yeah. Thank you. I realized while you were reading that the reason I don't like bios like that is I don't think they connect us. I listen to that and I'm like, I think what connects us actually is our struggles.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
Difficult times in life. I mean, I've taught a positive psychology course to therapists, and one of the intro exercises I'll do is tell a story of you at your very best. And a lot of people really struggle with that. But the idea basically is, tell me a story of you where you were struggling in life. And the story arc with you overcoming that struggle is you at your very best. But the part that really pulls us together and makes me want to like you or be with you or reveal myself to you is that struggle, I would say, at the front end. And so when I hear those bios, I'm like, I don't think those things connect us to one another. I think they can often do the opposite.
Yeah, well, and like you said, when people are willing to share their struggles and be vulnerable and share all the feelings that came when they were going through it and how they overcame it, like that's real. That's like something that you can relate to. But it's like, I get it, seeing the bullet points. It's like, oh, I've never been in U.S. News. I've never done, it's like, I've never done all these things.
And these comparisons, right? And then like, one of the things I realized when I got a PhD, I just thought it was a challenge. I wanted to find out more about myself, primarily about emotions. But I just wanted to kind of see if I could do that. But then I got it and I realized, oh shit, like this intimidates people. Like I didn't want to intimidate people. I just wanted to serve people. Mm-hmm. And so now literally a lot of times I don't go by Dr. John, Dr. anything. I'll just go by John. Mm-hmm. Because it's not about my ego.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you make that link, even that it's like, I think it's up to the person, right? Say if I get intimidated by an accolade, it's like, that's on me. What's being triggered? Why does it offend me or make me think I'm less than? But I think you're right. A lot of people struggle with that, just that instantaneous feeling of feeling less than or behind.
And I'm a big fan of connection. And, I remember when I got into positive psychology, I don't know, 20 years ago, I can be a little bit introverted, and I could be, maybe a curmudgeon before my time, a little bit of a, grumpy old man. And then I read positive psychology, and it's like, oh, one of the foundations to a happy life is connection and relationships. And I'm like, I got to go out there and be nice to people now, son of a. And I'm only half joking there, but I'm really a fan at this point in my life of connection. And to me, the most reliable level of connection is emotion. Like, I can connect with anyone anywhere in the world on an emotional level, because whatever you tell me you're going through right now, the circumstances might differ, but the emotions underlying it are exactly the same. And I've experienced those thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, I can tell a story about that if you want. I don't know, where you want to go, but the neurons just fired together. I was like, oh, that's right.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you originally got into psychology.
So the stupidest, most embarrassing, most shameful shit I've done in my life always seemed to happen when my emotional mind was in charge of me.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was anger or boredom or excitement or sadness, stress, anxiety, whatever it was, I was always a pretty smart kid. But then I had this, I always felt things deeply too, which is not how you want to be, when you're growing up as a guy. And so I was really vexed by these emotions that I had. And so I think, there was other things that went into this, but one of the main reasons was I really wanted to figure out this emotional part of myself. And, got trained to be a school psychologist, was working in Fremont, high school students coming in, sharing their stories with me. And their stories were filled, and rightfully so, with anger, fear, guilt, shame, sadness. And I didn't know at the time, and I was probably like 25, 26, that emotions are contagious. And so if you're not aware, if you're not taught to do otherwise, we pick them up if you've got any degree of empathy. And I remember that, like, I'm just taking in all of these negative emotions, and I got overwhelmed and I got depressed. And when we get depressed, inflammation in our body goes up. So any old injuries that you have or pains, those come back. And for me, it's always been my low back. So my low back is kind of seized up. I'm lying on the floor of my office. I'm depressed. Hope jumps out the window. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, if I can't manage my own emotions, how can I teach them to? And so at that point, rather than kill myself, which is, not a good option, I don't recommend it. I made a conscious decision to look for the best scientifically proven tools to manage that darker side of the human mind and heart. And that was great. It gave me some great tools to teach to people, but I realized this isn't, it never feels like it's enough, right? You're never fully armed. And so fast forward, I left school psychology. I had to reinvent myself, and I got into positive psychology early 2000s. And positive psychology, for those that don't know, is the scientific study of happiness, positive emotions, meaning and purpose, positive relationships, positive institutions. And to me, this was like manna from heaven. And I got all excited after reading a bunch of studies. And I was like, oh my God, I got to write this. Because one of the experiences I had when I was 17 was I was doing everything that the people around me, the adults around me, told me I needed to do to be successful. And I did it really well. As a senior in high school, I was student body president. I was captain of 3 varsity teams. I was taking advanced courses. I'm sure if to look at me from the outside, it looked great. But my internal experience was I was exhausted all the time. I was stressed most of the time, stressed and anxious. I was depressed occasionally. I was sick frequently because I was working my ass off. And it really started me thinking, where is there room in this idea of success for things like happiness or relaxation or contentment, because I wasn't feeling those things. So when I, got into positive psychology, I was like, oh, wow, like now I got the whole picture here. I have tools to turn down the volume on the negative, tools to turn up the volume on the positive. And I got to write, kind of this framework for how to coach people towards a successful and happy life. And so I wrote 600 pages and then realized no one's going to read 600 pages. And the rough draft of that book led to me doing a daily primetime radio show in the Bay Area. Well, that idea scared the crap out of me. So then my anxiety comes up, right? Because I'm like, they told me that the radio signal reaches 10 million people in the Bay Area.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how many were actually listening. It might have been 10.
But still, feels the same.
But in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, 10 million people. Like, what if I freeze? What if I screw up? What if I say the wrong thing? And so I really had to work to overcome that and learn how to emote on air, learn how to tell a joke in a vacuum, which is weird to tell a joke. And, I can see my producers on the other side of the glass laughing, but there's no feedback. It's just weird. So you have to laugh at your own joke. And then I learned how to tell stories. And then I kind of eased into it and learned how to relax into it. And then I got to interview a bunch of world-class experts, which was fantastic. So did that for a year, opened up private practice in Danville, started out with positive psychology, then rolled, because that was kind of lukewarm in the early 2000s, rolled into anger management, which really started me working mostly with men, although there's angry women out there as well. And a couple things happened. Like I realized pretty quickly that my business model really stinks, that I have to work an hour to get paid an hour. And if I'm sick or on vacation, nothing. And so I started looking at ways to create product for the web. How do I monetize my knowledge? And so I was getting some coaching and they were like, find a niche. I'm like, okay, I'll do a online anger management video course for men. So, I'm a geek in a number of ways. I can program. I love comic books. I anime or animation. Like there's all sorts of ways that I can geek out emotions. But so I threw up this website online and it had a 15-hour video course that I did. Immediately started getting angry emails from women all around the world. Like, hey buddy, we're pissed off. What about us?
Funny.
I don't know. Like they told me to find a niche. It wasn't about you. It's not personal. But I changed it and made it for everyone. And the other things that happened out of that were interesting is I got an email, and this was probably about 12 years ago. It said, Dear Dr. Schinnerer, been in prison for 27 years, been addicted to meth and PCP for as long. I no longer wish to be the man I once was. Trying to turn my life around. Thank you for the free anger management courses. And then he signed it.
Wow. That's amazing.
I give away a couple courses and then I would upsell. I don't know who this guy is. So I was like, hey, good job turning your life around. Keep up the good work. And I go see a client and I come back an hour later and there's an email response from this dude. And I'm like, who has email access in prison? And he says, Dear John, this isn't my real name. My handlers won't let me use my real name. Check out the books The Black Hand and Urban Street Terrorism. That's me. Once you do a little research, I'm sure you'll understand why I can't use my real name.
Oh, wow. He left you with a riddle.
Whoa, and now I'm curious. I'm like, this guy's good, because I had to check it out. So I check out the book, The Black Hand. It's about this guy, Rene Boxer Enriquez. Turns out he was one of the top 5 in the Mexican Mafia. Mexican Mafia started out as a prison gang in LA. He helped it grow into an international crime syndicate. 150,000 gang members pay homage to these guys. He's killed 12 people or more, I don't know. So I got to work with him for a little bit. So that was pretty interesting. And then on the other side of the coin, I got called by Pixar, which, they found me online and asked if I could come down and brainstorm with them on Inside Out. And I was like, heck yeah. So all that was just from being a geek about emotions and programming.
Yeah. One, it's you being in alignment with your purpose too, of like, hey, I'm going after this. This feels right. And then all these doors keep opening up and people see you do have naturally like a niche and a desire to spread knowledge. And it's like, it sounds like you've had a lot of really cool opportunities. How did you go from, or how did you deal with imposter syndrome or like feeling like, oh, I'm the guy, you know?
Oh, I've never thought I'm the guy. I do believe that I have the confidence in myself that I can help whoever comes in the door. There's some limitations to that, which I will screen out on the front end, but like schizophrenia, or if you're bipolar with, in a manic episode, like there's not a whole lot I can do in that moment. But for most people, there's a lot of tools that I can teach if you're willing to learn, if you're willing to grow in your self-awareness. But that all comes with experience and time. Because I remember in the beginning, I was just madly learning as much as I could. And it's not just about learning the tools, it's about practicing the tools and embodying them. And that takes time. And it also takes getting beaten up by life a few times. I think there's a point to that. And the point is, I'm really a big fan of humility. And I really love when, I'll say men, but I guess it could be anyone, get humbled and broken down by life, because I'm a big fan of, Derrida was a philosopher who said, the best way to true growth is through a radical shattering of one's framework. And so whenever I go through those parts of my life where I just get forced to my knees and humbled, it's kind of like I'm taking my glasses off through which I see the world, throwing them on the ground, shattering them, and I have to get down and pick up the pieces and put them back together. But it necessarily creates an opportunity for a new way to see people and life and myself.
I love that. I love that visual too. That's awesome.
So it gives the pain meaning. And I'm always looking for that. Like, what am I supposed to learn here? What's the meaning in this? Because I sure as hell don't want to repeat painful lessons. And I do think that these lessons are thrown our way until we get them.
Definitely. And I think something that me and Joanne talk about all the time is that how at any moment we can be a student and a teacher, right? If we're open to that, but we have to be open to learn and to be able to give and be vulnerable and share that, that experiences, those experiences that we've had. And it sounds like you do the same.
Outside of those rules, I think, one of the, beautiful gifts we can give other people is just listening, like truly listening to what the other person is saying. Because I think we all want to be seen, heard, and validated.
Yeah.
And, especially for us men, like you come home after a long day of work, you start complaining about work. My first instinct is, let me fix it. And it's like that. I think that's, it's a kind instinct, but it's not beneficial. It doesn't help.
And it's futile, right? Because you don't know what, all that it entails. Yeah.
So for men who've never done therapy or coaching and are still kind of on the fence about it, how would you ideally like for them to view it as?
Well, I used to deal with a lot with adolescents. So I get, be talking to a mom about bringing her male son in. And I'd be like, look, don't even mention therapy.
Don't say the T word.
Because, part of this also gets to man box culture and how we're socialized about the rules of what it means to be a quote real man. And one of those rules is you don't ask for help. Be self-reliant. All the great action heroes in movies, right? They don't need anybody. They know everything already. And so it's really ingrained in us to not ask for help. I remember growing up, my best friend, his dad, his teeth were rotting. And he was like in his 60s. My dad was the dentist. Instead of going to see the dentist, he pulled his own teeth out in the garage with a pair of pliers.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I could argue that that's self-reliant. That's badass. But at a certain point, this self-reliance, if you think about it on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being I'm totally dependent on other people, 10 being I'm a rock, I'm an island, I don't need anybody. That's a 10. And that becomes really problematic for men in general because we don't go to the doctor. We don't ask for directions. We don't go see help when we're struggling with panic attacks or depression. I've heard these stories over and over. A guy that had a knee swollen up to the size of a, I don't know, small watermelon. And he's like, I'm going for a jog. Like, good luck with that. I don't think it's a good idea, but I don't think me telling you that's going to change anything.
So would you say pride would be the biggest resistance that men
or
have?
social conditioning?
Our sense of masculinity. And I think, it's funny because I think masculinity has been said to be a negative identity in the sense of it tells us a lot about what not to be. It doesn't tell us what to be. Don't be feminine, don't be gay, don't feel, don't ask for help, don't back down, all that shit. And the biggest one to me that's a problem is the be stoic or don't feel, right? Because if you think back, if you think back to middle school and high school, and women are brought up in the same culture, so you guys will get this as well, I think. If I were to show too much sadness or fear in middle school or high school, inevitably someone, a peer or a friend, is going to say something like, don't be a pussy, don't be a little bitch, or don't be a little girl. Pardon me for the language to those out there who are sensitive to it, but this is what we get, and I think it needs to be talked about. And I don't think so. Interestingly, there's other insults you can put in there, but those three are the epitome of the feminine. I mean, think about that. Pussy, bitch, girl.
Yeah.
And I really think we need to reframe pussy as a word of power, resiliency, hope, but that's a whole nother story. It's not a put down and by any means, but I don't think it takes many times of getting those messages before you hop back in the man box and you're like, shit, I'm never showing that again. That hurts. That's embarrassing. I'm shutting that down. So that's sadness and fear and, guilt, shame, whatever else you got over there. On the other side of the emotional spectrum, the positive side, if you show too much joy, love, romanticism, excitement, flamboyance, God forbid, you'll get something like, dude, stop being or don't be so gay. So the message there is don't be homosexual.
Yeah.
So we got don't be homosexual, don't be feminine. You jump back in the man box. You're like, I'm never showing those sides of myself in public again. And what are we left with that we can publicly display? I would say it's three things, safely publicly display. It's lust. Because if I say, oh man, she's so hot, I do her, that signals that I'm straight, I'm hetero. So that's safe. The second one is stress, because if I tell you ladies, oh my God, I'm so stressed, it says I'm busy or important. So that's safe. The third one, the big one, is anger. Some degree of anger, annoyance, frustration, irritability, all the way up to rage. But anger is safe for us because no one's going to challenge us when we're really pissed. And when I'm really angry at you guys, I'm externalizing all blame onto you. So if you would just stop being fill in the blank, I wouldn't be so angry. So it completely removes me from any part of responsibility or accountability. And it completely divorces me from introspection. Like, I don't need to look at myself and say, what can I be doing better?
Yeah.
What do I need to change? What's my part in this play? And that's a real problem. If anger is the signature emotion for most men, which I believe is true, it just separates us from any ability to grow, evolve, and change. But back to your question, I think I would say that coaching or therapy doesn't have to be painful. It might be uncomfortable at times, but a lot of the work that I do with men is fun and funny and enjoyable. The men that I work with like coming back, which always kind of blows me away, whether they're adolescents or special ops or elite athletes or really wealthy men. Like, generally they like to come back, partly because I try and make it enjoyable. I don't want it to be unnecessarily painful. And a lot of it for me is just skill building. Think of gamification, right? Like if you're a character in a video game, you're just trying to level up in all these different areas. Well, it's the same thing. But a lot of times we have really big, significant blind spots in our own lives, in our own selves. And so I think you need someone to bring up these new ideas. Like for instance, one of the ones that I often bring up is competitiveness to men, right? Like a lot of the men that I deal with were excellent athletes at some point or still are. And so I'll ask them, on a 1 to 10 scale, how competitive would you say you are? From 1 being I don't give a shit to 10 being I'll do anything to win. And most will say I'm a 9, 10, or 11. And I'll say, so, have you considered that maybe you've looked at competitiveness as a global trait across all contexts and situations in your life? And maybe that's not helping you in the disagreements that you're having with your wife, where you think it's all about winning and losing. And that's really badly damaging the quality of your relationship, because it's not about winning and losing. It's about being heard and being curious and striving to hear what she's saying to you. Doesn't mean you have to change anything. Doesn't mean you have to hear what she's saying, what's the emotion underneath what she's saying. But it's certainly not about winning and losing. You can ride that horse all the way to divorce. Oh. Never thought about that.
Well, and
I never thought of competitiveness as something I could shift depending on the context in which I'm in.
Well, and in life, if you're constantly competing with everyone else around you, it's like you're not learning more about you. You're just trying to show up, like you said in the beginning. Yeah, you're showing up to compete with that external factor, but in actuality, you're not learning more about you. And I think that's awesome. No, I think you are teaching people how to figure out what they're feeling, what those mean, you're helping them kind of unveil that when they've kind of been hiding it from themselves.
Yeah. And I think we do that a lot. We hide from ourselves. But a lot of that's not painful to look at your own level of competitiveness. And am I being competitive in all areas of my life? And where do I want to pull that back in order to improve my relationships? I don't think that's uncomfortable at all. That's just awareness.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's the other thing that I've been looking at recently. I don't know if you want to go here or not, but I've also realized, I guess my personal evolution has gone physical, intellectual, emotional, relational, spiritual over the course of my life. And I've realized along the way that there are issues that need to be gotten at or gotten to that can't be arrived at through talk therapy very well. I mean, you can do it, but it's going to take years. And one of the things that I'm excited about, and that I've been doing a lot of research about, is use of psychedelics to get people to have an experience where it can be like years of therapy in a day, and radically collapse that timeline.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how you utilize that in your practice.
Well, I can give you the story of where I started on this. It really started because of my own frustration. I had a client that I've seen for 8 years, and he was treatment-resistant depression. Like, we've tried everything, and everything really that I could think of, alternative, psychopharmacological, behavioral, everything. And he wasn't really making any progress, and he was just kind of stuck in his bedroom of his parents' house. And occasionally I'll get frustrated with the lack of movement, and so I was like, hey, look, I've been doing research into psilocybin, which is, magic mushrooms, or the ingredient in magic mushrooms. The research seems to be quite good. It creates new brain cells. It creates new pathways between brain cells. It breaks up old habitual ways of negative thinking. And we think that it activates the default network, which is where your sense of self or your narrative about self resides. And kind of explained more to him about it and said, would you be up for something? Would you be up for going down this road? And he said, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. So I looked up clinical trials. There's clinical trials all over the US right now. And I think it's going to be legalized in 2025, MDMA in 2024 for therapeutic use. And he couldn't get past his anxiety to go to a clinic to do a therapeutic session. I'm like, okay, I get that. So we started trying microdosing. That helped a little bit. And then I said, look, if I can find a source for the mushrooms, how about I just come to your house and I'll sit you while you go on a journey for 6 hours? It was like, yeah, okay. And that was completely born out of frustration. I mean, I just get to the point where I'm like, I'm not stopping.
Yeah.
His life needs to improve. And I want to see if this works. And so we've done that 4 or 5 times. It's the most growth I've seen in him in 8 years. And we also combined it recently with a little bit of MDMA on the front end. Kind of the MDMA floods you with positive emotions, a sense of connectedness, large-heartedness, openness, but it also kind of gives you an insurance policy that you're not going to have a quote bad trip or a challenging journey. And then he can decide, how much mushrooms he wants to take that day. Usually it's around 2.5 to 3 grams. And then we sit and talk. And it's the most talkative he's ever been. It's the most open he ever is. It's the most vulnerable he ever gets to. But it also, particularly with the MDMA, it allows him to feel positive emotions. For a young man that hasn't felt positive emotions for at least 8 years.
Wow.
He was kind of besieged daily with suicidal thoughts. And so to me, it's relaying new neural tracks and shows him possibility. And it's really exciting because he's doing better than he ever has. And by the way, I was also in close contact with his parents throughout this to make sure they were on board. But I think we were all kind of frustrated. And so, thankfully, I'm really grateful that they were willing to trust me to try something new. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. And then I just started looking into more research, and more recently we're just beginning to start doing it with couples. And right now we've just done it with friends and guided them on journeys, and the results are they're life altering. And one of the things that's cool about the psychedelics is they're finding out that it seems to open a critical window reopen a critical window of development in the brain. So, like when we're children, like 0 to 2 is like a critical window for language, for example, and it might be longer than that, but let's say 0 to 2. Think if you can reopen these critical windows of rapid learning for 2, 3, or 4 weeks around social and emotional learning. Someone that's always been disconnected from people or always been very pessimistic and depressive. All of a sudden, there's this new opportunity for rapid growth in these areas of the brain. And that's exciting as hell.
No, that's awesome. And how would you say like a session differs from like a couple just as is, nothing on board, to that same couple, with MDMA, psilocybin on board? Yeah.
Well, there's a pre-journey session. So we go through sort of what to expect. We go through some meditative practices, some deep breathing practices. Here's what happens in the event you have a challenging experience. Know that it's temporary, know that I'm right here, know that it's going to pass, know that you just breathe through it. Know also that for most people, there's a huge amount of psychological gold in those challenging experiences after the fact, when we come back and look at it later. But so far, we haven't really had many of those. We haven't had any of them, but I assume that they're going to come. And then, you have the journey, which is typically about 6 hours, and then you do integration sessions afterwards. So you kind of pull the pieces together, figure out what the meaning is in the experience. But for most, people come out with this sense of magnanimity or open-heartedness stays with you. This sense of interconnectedness with all living things stays with you. You're more optimistic. You're less attached to your ego, which is incredibly valuable.
Love that. No, that's really cool. I guess in your experience, what do you think are some of the most common struggles and it could be men or women, but specifically men that you've seen that you've had to help coach people through and to get over. It's like, what are like the really common, I know you said anger obviously is a huge one, and that competitiveness. Are there any other things that you feel like are just you see in every single man that you treat?
Yeah, I think not every other, but a common theme is lack of meaning and purpose.
Mm.
And this one really angers me because it's not their fault. And that's this whole man, I talk about this man box culture idea. One of the things I love about this idea is I can share this with men and then say, look, realize none of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be socialized like this. It just happens. However, I would argue it is your responsibility to evolve beyond it. But I do like that, oh, by the way, like, this isn't your fault is a big deal. But we're socialized in such a way, I would argue, that we're only as good as our last achievement. And typically most men get the message that they need to be a good provider, which is not a bad message, but they take it, to the nth degree, and they really over focus on wealth creation, maybe creating power, maybe creating prestige, and, kind of some degree of reputation, which again isn't bad in and of itself. It's a matter of to what degree do you take it.
Mhm.
And I've talked to a lot of men who are worth a lot of money at, in their 50s that did it all right according to what they were, kind of the bill of goods they were sold at a young age, right? Go to college, get good grades, get a good job, get married, have kids, get promoted, throw yourself into work, make a shit ton of money, and then you retire at 65 and then you'll be happy. That's kind of the bullshit story that we're fed, I would argue.
Mhm.
It's completely wrong, but and so these guys come to me at 50 and they're worth 10, 100, hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't know. And they're like, I'm miserable. I'm like, yeah, not a surprise. And by the way, I mean, congratulations, you did a hell of a job. Like, you did everything you were supposed to do. You're just lacking meaning.
Mm-hmm.
You believed the bullshit story that was fed to you, and that's not your fault.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Well, and it sounds like they're really good at checking all those boxes.
Yeah.
Like, I did this, but they're not good at creating like that, like you said, that purpose behind it.
Well, they never stopped to go meta on their own lives and look at, where am I going and why, and is this fulfilling to me?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a result of a lack of meaning, then, other things set in, like depression. And depression with men typically shows up, I would argue, as irritability and impatience, and that's another story. But so I think lack of meaning is one that I the other one that comes up frequently is we men do not do a good job at creating or sustaining male friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a problem for me and so pervasive across my adult male clients over years. Again, I got frustrated. I guess a lot of good stuff's born out of frustration. And I decided to break the rules. And the rule to me is, I see one client a week, 1 hour in this little box. And I'm not supposed to do anything beyond that. But I realized that the vast majority of my male clients were sorely lacking in male friendships. And so I went to each one of them individually and I said, hey, listen, I'm thinking of starting a monthly men's dinner. There's no cost other than your dinner. The only agenda is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no pressure. Like, if you can come. If you can't come, that's fine. And these are men that I like, trust, and respect. And every one of my clients said, I'm in.
That's awesome.
And now that group's about, there's about 30 on the list, and we just meet once a month. And sometimes there's usually about 8 to 10 guys that show up.
That's sweet. Well, how do you think that group setting helps men find that meaning and purpose?
I think a big part of meaning well, let me put it this way. I've talked to a lot of experts on my podcast, and including 3 whose whole life's work is meaning and purpose. And I've asked them all, do you think there's a better meaning or purpose out there than serving others? And the answer is inevitably no. Now, you can take serving others and divvy it up different ways. Like for the men, it's like, let's say you still want to be a traditional man, and I've got some young men there doing this. Like, I'm going to go to business school. Okay, cool. I'm going to become an investment banker. Okay, cool. I'm not opposed to you making money, but I also need you to serve others along the way. And I need that to be in the back of your mind for when you make a lot of money. That's going to look differently than just like treating people when you're rising up the ladder with kindness and respect. That's part of it. That's cool.
Yeah.
But then you got to, you know, like whether it's sitting on nonprofit boards or giving money back to charity or getting really into an issue like, I don't know, beating cancer, for example. But you need to have this underlying meaning of serving others. And you know, so back to the men's monthly dinner, I think that it gives them a chance to connect, which just after COVID, I think is critical. I think it's giving them an opportunity to exercise social skills, exercise small talk, exercise like practice being vulnerable with other men, which is really awesome when you can share something either great or terrible with a group of men and get validation and support. And you know, on the great side, like let's say you have a huge win, to have a group of men that you can share that with who are genuinely excited for your success is rare and awesome. It's so rare because most people, when you share a success with a friend, a lot of us are beset by jealousy, which jealousy is fine. Like I don't have a problem with that, but understand that that's just one emotion, and we feel more than one emotion at the same time. So you can simultaneously be excited for your friend's good news and be jealous that you don't have that same good news. Let's just focus on the excitement now. And then maybe a little bit later, you can kind of indulge the jealousy. And I mean, you could even go back to your friend later and say, wow, you know, I'm really excited for you. And I'm a little bit jealous. Like, I wish I had that kind of good news in my life.
Yeah.
Like, that's a way better response than just being like, you don't think that's too much for you? Like, how are you going to deal with that extra time at work? Like, you know, you're not home enough as it is. You know, that kind of response where you're just pissing on the other person's parade. It's an instant bubble pop. And it's like, no, we need to help each other encourage and savor those positive emotions. Those are so critical to having a happy and meaningful life. I mean, we're in such short supply of those little suckers. But you know, to me, the negative emotions scream at us, right? You know damn well when you're really pissed off or when you're really sad.
That's easy to identify.
The positive emotions are quiet. They whisper, they're fragile, they're fleeting. If you overthink them, they go away. And so it really becomes a practice in how do we sit with them without judging them, without wondering, why am I feeling happy right now? Like, oh my God, this happiness is going to end soon. That's the foreboding joy effect.
Yeah. Well, I love how you're creating this microcosm, like this environment where it's so you're welcoming men to be vulnerable and open. And then if you join, you can see that other men are going through similar things and they're being vulnerable and it's okay. And it's like, it gives them permission to keep opening up and allowing that like happiness for each other and not just competitiveness. Like you said, like society kind of preaches. And I think that's awesome.
Right. It's supportive rather than tearing down.
Yeah.
Building up rather than tearing down.
Well, with the common struggles that men face today, how would you say that affects women? And what advice would you give to the women of this generation when dealing with men's struggles?
Oh man, that's there's so much there.
It's a loaded question, Joanne.
Just get a little piece of it.
There's a few ways I can go with that. But so just to put it in a historical context, women's expectations of marriage and relationship have changed dramatically, I would argue, since the 70s. What happened in the 70s? In the 70s was when a lot of women started getting into the workforce. So therefore they have financial freedom. In the 70s, the pill became widely available. So now they have reproductive freedom. Both good things. But it changed what a woman, I would argue, well, there's some research to support this, changed what a woman was looking for in a relationship. So it used to be in my dad's generation that if you were a good provider, if you weren't abusive in any way, you were a pretty good dad. You were a pretty good husband.
Mm-hmm.
Because marriage at that point was more of a financial agreement than anything else. And historically, that's what it's always been. Since the 70s, that's shifted rapidly. And now women are looking for a partner who's a lifelong romantic partner, someone who's empathetic, who's supportive, who's a good listener, who's emotionally aware, who's a good conversationalist. And men aren't, we have not been socialized in that direction. In fact, back to my earlier point, we've been mocked and humiliated for even daring to dip a toe in those waters. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think, you're pussy whipped, right? Back to high school relationships, yeah. Right? Dude, you're so pussy whipped. Well, no, actually, I'm just in a happy relationship. Piss off. Mm-hmm. But that's not, it's, and so it's, again, not men's fault, but I think that women are socialized, that you guys have been socialized generally, these are generalizations. You've been socialized to be more relationally aware, more emotionally aware, more communicative. You're better in relationship, whether friendship or romantic. Like, more from a very young age. And so realize that for the average man and average woman in relationship, the woman is going to know more about relationships. So in some important regard, you're going to be a little bit in the teacher mode, back to your point, right? That we're always teacher and student. I mean, I'm a big fan of Terry Real, who's one of the greatest couples counselors on the planet, I believe. And his, we're all trained, if we're doing couples therapy as therapists, to, you're supposed to be 50-50, right? You don't take a side, you don't believe one side over the other. You have to walk that impossible line right down the middle. Terry's like, no, that's bullshit. Women know more about relationships. They know more about emotions. They know more about how to communicate. So when a couple comes in, I give her story, her perception of reality, more credence, more weight. And then I go from there, because that's usually the more accurate version. And so I think that to me is really freeing and very telling. So, I think, and that's also why I like this idea of man box, because I've shared it with a lot of women, and the women are like, oh, and it allows them to have more compassion for the man that they're with, because it's not like he's purposely being a dick. It's that he's been socialized to believe these things, and the depth of socialization is so profound and so pervasive that he doesn't even realize it's going on. Mm-hmm. It's like he's wearing a mask, but the mask is fused to his face. Yeah. And that's why I do the podcast, is just to get a crowbar and to try and pry a sliver of sunlight between that mask and who they really are as human beings. I'm less concerned about masculinity. I'm more concerned about humanity. Yeah. And the other thing that's kind of, I don't know if it bears on this, but so there's a difference between sex and gender. Sex is biological, male to female, anywhere in between. Gender is social. It's learned, and that's masculine to feminine, anywhere in between. And we all have a balance of masculine and feminine. And I think that's the goal, actually, is to have a good balance. But you can have someone like a highly masculine female as well as a highly feminine male, and anywhere in between. So, I talk a lot about masculinity, but that's not necessarily only men that I'm talking about there. I know that to survive and thrive in the corporate world, women necessarily have to adopt more masculine traits. Sure. Because, and they're going to be vilified either way, right? If they show emotion, then they're too feminine, they're weak. If they don't show emotion, then they're a cold-hearted bitch. So there's an impossible line for corporate women to walk.
Well, and it's interesting. You're just making me think of a time where I was doing some like consciousness coaching and working through stuff and reevaluating like how I was acting and what the values I had. And I had to take a moment and just acknowledge like to my husband of like, oh, I had really good intention, but I'm so sorry that I made you feel X, Y, and Z, and I judged you in this way, and I'm sorry, like my bad. I really like feel awful about it. And it was interesting because that touched him so much, and he started crying. He's like, dude, no one has ever said sorry for their actions before. Like no one has ever told me that, that the feelings I felt were valid, and to me, it just made my heart explode, and I had so much empathy and compassion. You kind of touched on that, how that happens, but it was like, oh my gosh, like you don't have a sense of community that allows you to be vulnerable and to feel like your emotions matter and that they're actually a sign. And I was listening to a podcast of yours, and forgive me, I don't remember the quote, but it was just saying how emotions are the language of the soul. And I love that quote. I'm like, that's fantastic. And it's like, if we all viewed emotions as like that inner being trying to express and show us signs, then we would want to validate them more. And so I think it's awesome that you're kind of spreading awareness that like, hey, these aren't something to be scared of. We can talk about it, guys. Like it doesn't make you any less of a man. It's like, you're freaking human. Yeah.
Human.
No, definitely.
Fully human. And I think that's the goal, right? And I think we've cut ourselves off from a big source of power by cutting ourselves off from 2/3 of the emotional spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and think of the intense motivation increase when you're coming from a sense of purpose and positive intention. It's like, that's going to be a way longer driver than, oh, I need to be on this hamster wheel and make this money and I need to keep going and I'm exhausted, but I just got to keep going. It's like, which lifestyle is easier to wake up in the morning and to feel excited about what you're doing? It's like figuring out what that purpose and intention is.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it's a beautiful story and it speaks to self-awareness on your part. Well done.
Thank you.
Tasha Eurich has some research on self-awareness. And I really think, one of the biggest problems for men, but also I would say for all of us, I suppose, is a radical and profound lack of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the research shows that 95% of us will self-report that we are highly self-aware.
Of course.
And in fact, it seems to be about 12 to 15%. That's a huge gap and a huge problem. And I can't tell you how many men I've run into that are like, yeah, I am so emotionally aware. I am such a good communicator. I am so good at relationship. People that work for me love me. And I'm like, wrong, 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 and wrong. That's a problem. Because if I'm smug, if I think that things are great and I'm highly self-aware, again, it cuts me off from the possibility of curiosity, introspection, doing my own work, making the world and myself a better place, or a better person, better place.
Well, and it was interesting. My another little story. My husband shared this meme, and it was about, oh, Mother's Day. Everyone's like, I love my mom. She's so great. She's done so much for me. And then Father's Day, it's like, thanks, Pops. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually really sad. And I'm like, it's the way that you were raised. It's like your dad wasn't very emotive and wasn't very open, and so. It's interesting because I feel like the generation before, it's like, I want to be respected. And that's like the number one priority. My kids need to respect me. And in actuality, you're not giving a chance to learn from them or even to earn their respect. You think it's just granted.
Respect mean?
Exactly.
That's what I always pin people down on. Like, are you misapplying this word respect? Because respect, that concept, is a huge trigger for anger.
Yeah.
I had one dad teach his son that if anyone disrespects you ever, you punch him.
Oh my gosh.
And he was a really good fighter.
Yeah, I bet.
Because he had a lot of opportunity. But really, like, I ask people all the time, it's like, was that really about respect? For instance, like, you ask your teenage son to go clean his room or tell him, and he rolls his eyes and it's like, is that disrespectful? I know a lot of people that would say, yeah, I wouldn't throw respect on that at all. I would say that's a human response. It's a subconscious
Like expression. Yeah.
expression. Does he want to go clean his room? No. Is he going to clean his room? If he's going to clean his room, then shut up and let him go clean his room.
Yeah.
And get respect out of the picture. It has nothing to do with respect. It's just he doesn't want to go clean his room. It's not about you.
Well, and that's where that awareness comes in.
Well, and it also makes me think of, egocentricity, right? That we're so self-focused and we're so self-absorbed. And the vast majority of us got through adolescence, but we stopped developing at adolescence, and we've continued that egocentric outlook. And we think everything's about us, other people's emotions, other people's, nonverbal cues. It's not about us.
When you depersonalize it, it's like, I don't have to get offended because it's not about me. It's about him not wanting to do a chore. It's like, it could be as simple as that. Yeah. But I feel like you have to at least do that work to like disassociate respect with making a comment back or rolling your eyes. And I think that's important to evaluate and be like, why do I get so fired up when my son doesn't want to clean his room? It's like, because I'm interpreting it wrong. Yeah.
I had a professor at Cal who was my favorite professor there. He's a Sikh Indian, wore turban and never cut his hair, and really gentle, kind, smart man. And I was having a problem in one of the schools one day, and I came to him and he was like, John, we make the mistake of taking 95% of what other people say, do, and feel personally, when in fact it's about 5%. And I thought about that for years.
That's huge. Yeah. No, for sure. That changes how you look at the world.
To your point, we over-personalize shit all the time. I mean, think of the boss coming into work angry, right? Like he's noticeably annoyed. Everyone around him thinks, oh my God, what did I do to piss him off?
Yeah.
When in fact, there's 600 other explanations that are probably far more possible that have nothing to do with you individually. But we personalize and over-personalize other people's emotions all the time.
Yeah.
That also goes back to us absorbing other people's emotions, kind of like how you mentioned, it spreads.
Once you realize that emotions are contagious, to me, it really motivated my own responsibility to try to watch what I was spreading.
Exactly.
Or to one of the things I talk with clients about is this idea of primal world beliefs. And it's based on research at UPenn by Jared Clifton, who I think is doing brilliant work. But primal world beliefs are the beliefs that we hold about the world at large, right? And it starts with this umbrella belief. Think of them on a spectrum, 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. The world is good versus bad. Then it breaks down to 4 other areas. World is alive versus mechanistic. The world is safe versus dangerous. The world is dull versus enticing. I think those are the 3 subcategories. And then there's like 25 others. But I think that's an interesting thing to look at, but then I break it down to what are your beliefs about people in general? And, to what extent do you see people as safe versus dishonest, or safe versus dangerous, honest versus dishonest, good versus bad? And I think it's a really important question for first responders in particular to look at, because I think it's really easy to overgeneralize from the population you're dealing with, like think police, on a day-to-day basis, and you have a lot of interactions with people that are very needy or criminal intent, and then you overgeneralize that to the population as a whole, which completely erodes the emotional quality of your life and your relationships. But I remember I was asking a client this one time, and I said, so, just people are honest versus dishonest, 1 to 100 scale. Like, what would you say the percentage of people is honest versus dishonest? He goes, I would say 20% of people are honest.
Wow.
I was like, wow. I said, because, me, I would say 85 to 90% of people are honest, or trying their best, or good, or, would ask, or would help me if I asked them. I said, so that's really deep to me, because we live in the same world, but we live in 2 fundamentally different realities.
Yeah.
And so play that out for a second. So if I subscribe to your belief about people in general, I go out to Starbucks, get a coffee, talk to nobody, because why would I? I go get my groceries at Safeway. I talk to nobody, because why would I? I go to work, I only talk to who I have to, and then I come home. And it becomes this self-reinforcing belief. Because you never interact with anyone, you never give anyone the chance to be safe and honest, and you just live in a shitty, dark, pessimistic world. Now, contrast that with, I believe 90% of people are honest and good. I go to Starbucks, I look for opportunities to talk to people in line in front of me or behind me. I look to connect with the barista. I'm looking to see if I can find a connection where they will smile, because then we both win in this little micro connection of positive emotion, right? We both walk away feeling better about ourselves and humanity in general. I go to Safeway, I do the same thing. I remember I talked with a cashier, found out he loved old BMWs. Now every time I go in, I check in with him about his old BMW. I don't give a shit about his old BMW. I care about the positive emotion that he experiences when talking about it.
Yeah.
And now if you multiply those by, 10 interactions per day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 10, 20, 30 years, those are cumulative. And it creates a better world in which you live. You also get a positive emotional hit each time. And so that becomes self-reinforcing too.
Well, what are some tools that you give your clients to help reframe that outlook that they have?
I have them tell themselves that they are intensely curious people, or they are intensely curious about people, that they just want to get to know their stories. I said, I need you to tell yourself that over and over and over. There's no agenda. And I can apply this to dating. I can apply it to depression or pessimism, social anxiety, because even if you're dating, right? If you're out there, I've talked to young men trying to meet women. I'm like, tell yourself you're an intensely curious person, that you just want to get to know her story. There's no other agenda there. And you have to tell yourself this. It's not about getting digits. It's not about getting a date. It's not about getting laid. It's just curiosity alone. You just want to get to know who they are. Because some of this is out of your control, right? You might go up to, because if that's your intent and you go up to a beautiful woman at Starbucks, let's say, she might receive you warmly. She might be like, fuck off, I'm trying to read. Now, if you get rejected like that in a cold way, that has nothing to do with you. And so again, back to the depersonalization strategies, right? So if you know that you're just curious, you just want to get to know a little bit more about her, there's no agenda there, then it becomes clear if she receives you negative in a negative sense, it's more about her than you. And there's 1,000 reasons that might be, right? Maybe she gets hit on all the time and she's just fed up with it. Okay, well that's her story.
Or maybe she assumes everyone's a liar, you know?
Right. Yeah. And so I just love living life by being intensely curious about people and really understanding the importance of that need for connection, how much those little micro connections, those little experiences of positive emotion accumulate and radically change the quality of our lives.
Well, and I feel like ultimately that's preaching being present. It's don't anticipate this is going to end up in any kind of way. Just be present, be open, feel that interaction, and then you can make your judgment later. Or you can, try to make a goal later, right? But I think whenever we can be present, we're at our best selves, and we're in alignment and trying to just be there and see what comes and accept the moment for what it is.
Yeah.
That's a lot more rewarding, and you're more aware of what's going on and not just hyper focused on the end goal of whatever you're wanting that interaction to be. So I love that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I feel like there's less expectation
I taught this to my daughter going into a middle school where she knew 4 people going in. That's a tough assignment. And this is in Danville, and that's even tougher. And I said, look, just make a goal of every class you go into, put your hand out there, smile, say, hey, my name's Molly, what's yours? and just meet 5 people in each class per day and get to know their names, just be curious. By leaving, 3 years later, she left that middle school. She was like, I don't know what, those awards that you get, like best dressed kind of thing. Like she got best dressed. So she was well known by everybody leaving that school,
Awesome.
which is impressive. And she also dressed to her own drummer, like just her own style, which I think takes a lot of courage. I never had, but so I was just really proud of her going in and just kind of really dominating middle school on a social level, which is a really difficult task.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, to kind of tie in on that topic, what advice would you give to the younger generation so that they can become more self-aware?
I think making self-awareness a priority. I think being curious. I think being humble. I think knowing, to me, one of the best values we can have is lifelong learning. And you can, take that in different venues, different paths. But for me, I spent a lot of years on self, emotion, cognition, physical. And that was where my teaching was kind of individual, right? Like I was focused on the individual level. And then later I got into more dyads and couples and relationships, because that does add some layers of complexity. And then, kind of expanded that as I've gotten older. So I think for young people, I would say, have some sort of meditative practice is a big deal. That's probably the best way to build self-awareness. The other tool that I love, which is really simple, which is why I love it. There was a study that showed that the best and easiest way to build metacognition and self-awareness is to simply stop, pause, and ask yourself 3 times a day, what am I feeling right now? And do a quick body scan, because emotions are embodied, so they're usually in your body. You guys know this, but and the beautiful thing about that is the answer doesn't matter. The research study showed that it doesn't matter how you answer that. It doesn't matter if you answer that. What's important in the process is stopping, pausing, and asking the question. It's the idea of creating more psychological distance from the thought stream and from yourself, going meta on self. And that takes a little bit of practice, but it's also one of the most valuable skills I think we can learn, because it also makes your life, when painful, less painful.
Totally.
And there's another, I remember I interviewed Ethan Kross. He wrote Chatter. So he's kind of one of the world's experts on chatter in your head. And he had a brilliant suggestion for creating psychological distance, which we've known for years is a great way to go to, kind of step out of that thought stream and feel less of the pain that you're in, like to kind of get some distance, be more objective about it. And it has to do with how you speak to yourself, what person you use to speak to yourself in your own head. So for example, when I'm flooded, when I am in the shit in my own head, I'm speaking to myself first person singular. I, me, my. Oh my God, I can't take this anymore. This sucks. This is so painful. I hate this. At that moment, I am fused with my thoughts and my feelings. There's no separation. And what we find is if you speak to yourself and shift from that to second or third person, it's the easiest way to create psychological distance with the least amount of cognitive load, least amount of effort. Because there was old times, in the past, I would tell, I remember I had a guy who was really anxious. And I said, well, can you describe your anxiety to me? And he brilliantly, without missing a beat, he said, yeah, it's like I'm in the middle of a hurricane. I was like, wow, that's a hell of a description. Like I can see that, winds are blowing 120 miles around you, shit's bouncing off your head. Yeah, that feels really painful and uncomfortable. I get that, thanks. And I said, so using that metaphor, how about if you take a couple steps back into the eye? Because at least in the eye of the hurricane, there's oxygen, there's no wind, it's calm, you can catch your breath, things are cool. Now you're still kind of in danger there, so it's a step. Now the next step is imagine yourself as the weatherman reporting on the hurricane from a couple miles away. And then if you want to keep going, you can imagine yourself as the TV news anchor talking to the weatherman, so on and so forth. But that takes a lot of thought and effort to do that. So it's creating psychological distance, same idea. But the easiest way to do it is to just go from, oh my God, I can't take this anymore, to, John, relax. Yeah, this is tough. And you got this. It's going to be all right. And you can hear, it's funny because it's just thoughts, but there's an emotional tone to the thoughts.
I love that.
Huge,
and then you're coming from a place of control instead of like, I'm trying to keep up. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. That inner dialogue.
Yeah. No, I love that. All right. I know we've covered a lot, and I feel like we could keep covering because I love your knowledge and your intellect and all the research that you've kind of read and done. And I really appreciate you sharing some of your experiences.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So if someone were interested in working with you, where could they find you? Can you drop your IG handle?
On planet Earth.
Website.
Yeah. So a website's guidetoself.com, theevolvedcaveman.com. Those are the two main ways. Yeah. The
On your
podcast is the Evolved
podcast.
Caveman.
Yeah.
The podcast is really my attempt to just give information away for free. I like to have different price points because I know not everyone can afford me. So that's also why I did online courses, and I think it's important to have access to the tools, and I don't want money to be a barrier.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Awaken Your Ego, a podcast that explores biohacking and self-discovery. We hope you follow us on Instagram and Facebook to stay up to date on what we're working on in your area.